Welcome, folks. Lane and Paul are here. We're going to be talking about loneliness. So I'll start off with my story here. I was just featured on Business Insider. You guys are going to laugh, but the title was I struggled to make and keep friends as a millionaire. Now I can only connect with other wealthy people. But I don't know how I feel about that title. Yeah, like I would say recently I've been joining a lot of entrepreneur groups, Vistage, EO, and I will definitely say that I found my tribe, or like what I call like entourage is the term I use. The people around you that do the same thing as you, that are your cheerleaders. These people aren't definitely not your family, they're not your friends, but they're kind of board advisor, entourage type. So when I do a self-assessment, I'm like, yeah, I feel very confident in that arena. But it wasn't too long ago of that. It's a very lonely struggle, and it's especially when you have a different career paths, financial ideals. It's lonely to walk that other side. But I know we're going to be going through some topics on this. Poe did a lot of work into this topic.
I think especially since a lot of our listeners would probably think of themselves as high achievers, or we have a lot of entrepreneurs, professionals in our listener base. So I think this topic is quite relevant because for people in this category, it can be, as you said, difficult to find a lot of people that you can relate to. And then success in certain arenas, in the professional arena, can lead to some more unique challenges.
Yeah, another thing too, I think a lot of the investors I work with are guys, and I definitely think guys are a lot more loners on the struggle. That's always been my theory on why guys die so early. Just the lack of community too.
Oh, for sure. And that's something that we'll delve into. We'll look at the science behind loneliness, and we'll talk about how this problem is more prevalent among middle-aged men because there's this societal expectation that men in general not show their emotions or not appear vulnerable.
Tell us what happens with our brain chemistry and what does loneliness do to us?
I think at the time of this recording, it's a rainy season here in the Pacific Northwest, and so that leads to an increase in seasonal affective disorder. Not just here, but in other parts of the world as well. Seasonal affective disorder is a real thing. This made me think about this topic of loneliness and how even the previous Surgeon General made a big deal about this epidemic of loneliness. But it's definitely worth talking about because I think it's under recognized and has real serious health repercussions. So let's start off by talking about some of the neuroscience behind loneliness. In short, neuroscience has shown us that our brains are wired to connect. So loneliness, it's not just feeling sad. It actually registers in the brain as a threat and triggers the same areas of the brain that are associated with physical pain. There's a neuroscientist, his name is Ben Ryan, and he recently wrote a book called Why Our Brains Need Friends. In his book, he talks about how the brain interprets social disconnection as danger. And when this happens, the brain actually activates a response system. You're going to see increased cortisol, inflammation, and even altered immune function in our bodies. There has been research showing that chronic loneliness actually increases your risk of early death by 26%, which is comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It's also been shown in a separate study that loneliness is associated with a 40% increase risk of dementia later on in life. And other studies have showed that loneliness is associated with an increased risk of heart disease, stroke, and depression. So in short, loneliness has really real measurable health effects. It's not just this all in your head thing. It does begin there, but it has major serious health consequences.
So what are they measuring for like the cigarettes thing? Is there something in like blood work or like what?
I think they looked at like all cause mortality for this, and they've definitely done a lot of studies on the detrimental effects of cigarette smoking. The increase in the risk of all cause mortality is roughly the same as like smoking 15 cigarettes a day, which I don't know how many cigarettes in a pack these days, but 50 cigarettes is quite a lot.
Yeah. Was there any comparisons with like sleeping 6 hours a day or something like that? Because they always use the
Mm.
sleeping thing as a baseline.
I don't know if they compared it to sleep, but separate studies have looked at the effects of chronic sleep deprivation, to your point. And I think we've talked about this in a previous episode when we talked about sleep. A decrease in your amount of sleep in the long term is also associated with a lot of these same things that we're talking about. Increase in cardiovascular morbidity, depression, dementia. You can lump all these things in the same general category. And we also know that loneliness increases your risk of having poor sleep. And then poor sleep is in itself a separate risk factor for all-cause mortality.
Yeah, it goes against the you got to do it all yourself. You got to work hard. I had this idea. We always talk about like the kids, they got to go to college,
Yeah,
learn to live the suck life. And part of that is loneliness, because maybe that's how you appreciate it more.
absolutely. It's tough, right? Because for a lot of high achievers, there's just pressure to appear on the outside. You have it all together, right? Like you want to appear strong, you want to be competent, and yeah, you want to project this image of confidence, right? As you pursue all these various endeavors. And for a lot of busy professionals and entrepreneurs or go-getters, you're just busy, right? So relationships can oftentimes take a back seat, right? Whether it's your marriage or this relationship with friends. So, multitude of reasons why high achievers are actually more at risk for feeling lonely. Something that I think we definitely need to be on the lookout for. I mean,
Maybe it's or this is my pitch for my startup. So my whole idea is to create an app like all these Instagram, Facebook. I don't use these silly things anymore because like none of it is actually your friends on it. It's
yeah.
just what the algorithm serves up to you to keep you on the platform longer. So unfortunately, there's a void now. The early days of Facebook were cool, where you actually connected with your friends. But I think there's a difference between the digital connection and the actual physical in-person connection. My idea for app is you load up all your friends, like your real friends, not the
Mhm.
1,000 people you have on your list, but the real 50 or 75 or even 25. And like when you're in proximity to each other, it gives you an alert. Now, sometimes you may be antisocial, you don't want to hang out,
Uh,
but it just gives you the option like, oh, hey, pose within a mile or 5 miles from you.
yeah.
And it just alerts both of us. And you can ignore it, right? Like you could, but at least if both people want to interact, then it connects you. That's the one thing about Hawaii is it's so small. And if we went to the mall, I bet I'd see a couple people I know, right? You just moved to a new town, right? You don't,
Yeah.
and it's a huge town. Serendipitous proximity to friends is it's a huge thing.
Yeah, I think that's a really cool idea. We live in this digital age, right? It's about scrolling and then getting a lot of likes on your posts, right? Which creates a short dopamine hit. And I think that's a shame because I feel like what that creates is this culture where folks are after that short dopamine high, right? Instead of actual genuine connection. In terms of the neuroscience, there's a hormone in our bodies called oxytocin. Some of us might be familiar with it. It's oftentimes called the love hormone. And we know that this is released during eye contact, shared emotional experiences. Eye contact increases oxytocin. Things like physical touch reduces cortisol levels, lowers your blood pressure. Being in a group setting increases your body's natural endorphins, right? So none of these things we can actually get from online. What we do get from online is that quick dopamine hit, which is like a quick reward.
But that's something different though, right? That's being validated,
Mhm.
these fake online friends. That's something different. But I would also say if you and I turned on the like the little if we turned ourselves into a robot or all those fun like things that kids like to play with, we're not looking at each other, but we're still getting the same thing, the interaction a little bit.
Somewhat, but I think you're not gonna get as much as if you're face to face with
In
somebody.
person. I think that's what's hard is like people are just so separated these days that, maybe I'm just searching for some people, they've just grown far apart from their college friends and their work friends are just work friends. And like it is what it is. They want to reconnect with the old people, and the digital might be the only method
Yeah.
for that.
Yeah, that is like a modern bind, right? So we have the convenience of technology to help us more easily stay in touch with people in the past, but at the same time, definitely don't want to rely on that as your main means of connection. So ideally, I would say use technology to help you initiate the contact and use it to actually supplement real connection or to have the technology help you to initiate real connection.
But that's why I think where a lot of people drop off, right? Because it
Yeah.
requires courage and stepping out of your
Hmm.
comfort zone to source new people, call it lead gen, if
Yeah.
you will.
Yeah.
But maybe if somebody's a type A person, then they grasp that challenge. You're a junkie for it. You like it. So do I. I think there's a lot of people out there that they'll say, "Oh, they'll use the whole I'm an introvert thing. I don't need. I got my wife. I got my brother or
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
sister, and I don't really need anything else."
I'm glad you brought that up because when we're talking about introverts and extroverts, there's definitely this misconception that introverts are a little bit more immune to loneliness. But the reality is that introverts and extroverts actually they both experience connection, yet they just experience it differently. And they both certainly need it. Right? So in the case of introverts, they recharge quickly when they're in the presence of someone and feeling connected. So they can charge up really quickly, but they can also deplete really quickly in high stimulus social situations. But they definitely need that connection. Whereas extroverts will tend to need more frequent interaction in order to feel grounded, and they won't deplete as quickly or might not deplete at all in high stimulus social environments.
Like a solar panel on their back for social
Yeah.
interactions.
The other point that I want to bring out is that people who practice being engaged in social interactions, they're going to have, in general, a bigger neurochemical boost during those interactions versus somebody who is out of practice. So if you take a person who's out of practice, who really hasn't had that much social interaction, you put them with an actual human being, they're going to get less of an oxytocin boost than someone who is more used to being in the presence of others. Right? So this is definitely one of those things
Right.
where if you don't use it, you lose it.
It's a falling forward thing. So it's if your kid is really good at taking tests, they'll get more praise, so they'll keep doing good. But it's how do we get the ones that
Yeah.
good? That's the troubling thing here. So the rich get rich and the poor get poor. What's new, Paul?
In other words, if you're feeling like really awkward, if you're just one of those people that you've been lonely for a while and it's going to be hard at first. You're not going to feel
Yeah.
like the neurochemical effects right away. It's going to be tough, but the more you do it, the easier it's going to get. The bigger the neurochemical boost, the bigger the health benefits. So
Yeah.
basically, the more you do it, the easier it's going to become, and then the more health benefits you're going to get.
Yeah. The older you get, the more muscle tissue you lose. And
Mm.
then muscle is like that buffer between disease and etc. at very old age. So that scares people enough to pick up a barbell from time to time. And I think the same thing can be said about people, your brother, sister, but people die, especially when you get past the age of 50. Unfortunately, it sounds sad, but it's a bit of a numbers game here. If you don't have some redundancy in your people, then you're just gonna be that poor cartoon dinosaur that says his friends all died and he's the only dinosaur around. So I don't know. I don't know. I'm just trying to trick people into getting more friends, maybe. Yeah, you got quality over quantity for sure. You never know what happens. You can't just put all your faith in five people. You got to get out there. You got to continue to be sourcing. It's just if you're a business owner, you got two or three, you got a government contract, you got two or three big accounts. You can't just live off that. You got to keep
Yeah.
sourcing.
Yeah, no, that's true. Especially, people move around, right? Like some of us might be lucky enough where these five friends stay in your area. It might be easier to maintain that connection, but at least in my experience, people do move around, right?
People moving around. Like I was reading this book, I forget who wrote it, Let It Theory, Mel Robbins. I don't know if you did you read that one, but it's a pretty popular book. But she breaks down like the three parts of why people become friends. It's proximity, timing, and energy. In the context of the book, if you're like anybody who has hard time letting go of things and living
Yeah,
a
yeah,
complete monk lifestyle mentality, it's a good read. But explain why certain friendships come and go. And it's just her way she positioned it in her book. If it's these three things that need to be in alignment, if not, it just wasn't meant to be at that time. It could come back, right?
yeah,
Like right now, we got the kids, we're in proximity to a lot of other parents, and that's the timing thing. The timing thing is the big one for if you have friends with other friends of your kids,
yeah.
you guys are all in that stage of life. That's that framework for there. So one could backwards engineer that framework and proximity, you get physically around other people, timing, going through the same struggles,
Mm.
themes in life, and then energy. I think that's you, right? That's you need to be not just a resting bitch face some people have. You gotta be open.
Yeah, and as we're talking about, the health benefits are really real, right? There's a study that shows that those who are the most socially isolated, you're 50% more likely to die by any cause over a 10-year window. That's 50% more likely to die. That's insane. It really shows how our brains are wired for connection, and without it, we really suffer.
It's had up come up in like the retreat from time to time. Like people, it's usually in January, so everybody's on their whole New Year's resolutions or making changes. But the topic of I don't see my old friends anymore. I don't even know if my friend we really are have that much in common anymore. But whatever. I think that the question was like, how do I make some type of routine schedule to reach out to my friends, even though they don't reciprocate? Right. The fact that that's why people come to the retreat because typically we're the ones who have our stuff together and trying to proactively overcome these types of things. But I guess what do you do to maybe is there some system or like, to re-energize old relationships, or maybe do you have the opposite mentality of whatever happens, but let me just work on sourcing new friendships?
I think personally, I mean, both are important. I know that for some of my older friends, especially if they live far away, it takes a lot of intentionality, right? Everyone's busy, but yeah, it takes a lot of intentionality. And sometimes I drop the ball, right? And sometimes I know that the other person picks up the slack, and I'm always really grateful for that. There are some friends I can think of right now that we both dropped the ball. So if you both drop the ball, then that's when you can probably go a couple years without talking, other than the occasional quick text or happy birthday message. I think you talked about things like retreats. I think those are cool because you have a group of like self-selected people who are motivated to go out and make new connections. People who are growth oriented and looking to grow their connections and make new friends. And that's always really nice because you don't need to go through that sort of weeding process. You have a group that's self-selected itself, right? And if it's a retreat based on some common interests, commonalities, then you're hitting the ground running.
Yeah, I guess I wasn't surprised you said that. You're a little bit more of the let's just keep moving forward and what happens. I think I play maybe I'm a little bit more on the I'll text, send a couple invites out, but if I don't hear any life at the other side of the line, I check the box and I move on too. Because
Mm.
my theory is if you're wasting your time with other things, then the other car can't come and park in the parking lot, parking
Mm.
stall
Yeah,
is my thought. If anything, just taking up your own bandwidth. Yeah, I make it a point to be the guy who resurrects old things, but I'm not gonna chase you more than twice, is my thing.
yeah,
But yeah, I think I do the same thing that you do too, is I make a conscious effort, maybe a few times a year to be like, okay, what am I gonna do? Where am I gonna go to meet some new people? And then also I'm like, who in my network already that I would like to maybe go in deeper with?
yeah.
Like
I think
I
that
was
yeah,
thinking that that whole proximity, timing, and energy thing. Like what is it? Like Halloween time now, right? We've got the pumpkin patch. We normally go as a family, but thinking maybe we should invite them, right? Because their kids are the same age. Would have never done that before, and maybe
yeah,
they would have thought it's a little awkward. But
yeah,
hey, just put
yeah.
up the invite and see if they reciprocate. If
Yeah, proximity is huge. I think.
yeah, what are your thoughts on that? So like a lot of things you do are just with your family, right?
Mm.
Certain things, I don't know, maybe Christmas morning you want to do that with your family. I think that's maybe
Yeah,
basic. Not going to say that's everybody should do that, but I think sometimes you maybe this is the way that I was growing up and maybe why I went the opposite direction, but we always my family, we always did our things as a nuclear family and there was no external friends. I personally just don't really like that too. So I've constantly tried to, if I remember the way I grew up, do you go with your kids by themselves or do you invite other people?
they're old enough now to. They're too cool for us. They
But
go with
did
their own
you
friends.
at the time?
In the years past, I think the first time we went with them, but we ended up going with some other parents, their kids.
Did you initiate that, or were
No,
you the oblivious,
that was
very
I did not
standard who
initiate
would,
that. No, I was
uh,
lucky enough to be invited.
yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know. What's something that I think we all could find one thing to be out of our comfort zone, proactive about
Mm.
something.
Yeah, this is a bit off topic, but something new that I'm doing and also my wife is doing is we're learning different types of dance, right? So some of these group classes will go together, but they'll have you rotate partners just to practice with different people. It's a fun way to meet new people, make some small talk and have some fun. Types of activities or exercises that have been shown to increase your life expectancy the most. And things like group dance lessons, social activities like pickleball, tennis, they all share this sort of social aspect to it. Yeah.
I do remember that, like the
Yeah.
racket sports, right? But the way I read into that, it's like proximity. You're around those types of people, and there's some kind of similar thing.
Yeah.
And I think there are people out there, and maybe the listener can fight me on this, and maybe they'll never listen again. But there are some people who are true introverts, but I don't think it's the most healthiest thing, but it's also tough. You got to put yourself in an uncomfortable situation when you're starting out. There was an exercise, actually, you know this guy too, where he ran a workshop where he would have everybody write down all their interests and what they do. And then you just back then it was Meetup, right? But nobody uses Meetup anymore because it's like the worst website ever. I think Luma is the one for the tech people like to use
Mm.
these days. But you try and find where like the community events are, and you just kind of get yourself in proximity. Sometimes you get meet some kind of out there people, but I think that's a good starting point. So like the examples that he gave was like if you like plants, go to a plant store or
Yeah.
plant trading event and figure out what you like. And I think this is where introverts or people who like their seclusion, they can think to themselves, what do I like? What do I get interest in? But the next step is to take that moving forward and what are the community events out there? In fact, hey, we can use ChatGPT for this, right? What do I like?
Yeah.
And where the heck can I find other people that are like-minded in this?
Right. Yeah, I mean, for most introverts, I think the reality is that they crave this deeper connection with people, which is a beautiful thing. I think the challenging part is getting a relationship to that point. Oftentimes, you have to have the small talk first before you can get to the big talks, like deeper talks that a lot of introverts, that's what they're really after. And that's what they find most rewarding. That's where they get their deep connection, those relationships from. Yeah. You have to put yourself out there a bit.
Imagine that. It's not easy, right?
But yeah, again, there's a difference in feeling lonely versus isolation, right? It's very possible, very common for people to actually feel lonely in the presence of people. Heck, even if we're talking about relationships and marriages, unfortunately, there's a lot of people in marriages and relationships who feel lonely, like they're not connected to their spouse or their life partner. Yeah. So it's very possible to feel lonely even in the presence of others. And then when you feel lonely, that can have all those same deleterious effects on your health. Right? But this is why on our podcast, we do a lot of episodes on relationships, right? Because
Yeah.
ultimately, I think there's research that actually says that of all the things out there, the quality of your relationships actually has the most bearing on how happy and fulfilled you are, right? It's not your income, it's not your accomplishments, not your achievements. It all comes down to the quality of your relationships. And I think this is why on this podcast we spend a lot of episodes talking about relationships. And we've also talked about plenty of times how relationships, that's the currency of the rich and wealthy in multiple ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is somewhat circuitous. If you don't have a lot of other external relationships other than your marriage, you may also manifest as being cranky and not being the best spouse
Oh,
too.
yeah.
If you're not a very well-connected person, you may think that everybody is happy out there. As before we were on the pre-call, you and I were talking about people breaking up. It happens all the time.
Yeah.
So, it's better to like it's kind of like buying life insurance. You might as well. You almost got to count on it happening in a way,
Yeah.
unfortunately. That divorce happens so much, and if that were to happen, that would put you in a pretty tough spot. So start building the bridge that you need for tomorrow, maybe. Hopefully I don't meet the wrong person that creates the divorce,
Yeah.
obviously. I'm just saying that because I think some people use it as an excuse, right? No different than why don't I eat? Why don't I sleep well? Because of excuse XYZ, right? So if we can eliminate this excuse or frame it and call it out for what it is, we can move to like, all right, wife and I have a good relationships. That's great. But what can we do to improve our external relationships as a thing? So,
Yeah, but in most, if not all cases, the marriage and the relationship is going to be better if both people don't place all their eggs in that one relationship because it's a big burden, right? To
yeah.
expect somebody to check off all these boxes, right? Like you want your partner to be like your best friend, your spiritual equal, your business partner, your lover, your best friend, like all these things. And it's never been like that in history before, but nowadays we have this expectation that this one person is supposed to fulfill all our needs. And I think that's actually quite dangerous. So all the more reason to make sure you have your other friends, make sure you live your own life, make sure you have hobbies and interests. And I think that'll actually make the relationship tend to be stronger than to rely solely on one person for your happiness and fulfillment.
Yeah. If anything, who wants to be with somebody who's so needy? And I'm not saying that you shouldn't have both feet in, not saying
Yeah.
that, obviously, but I had this argument the other day. It's like we're talking like, oh, all these celebrities, right? They always get divorces and stuff like that. And my sort of smart ass comment was, it's because they got options. If there's a lot of people out there that are not happy and don't have any options, so they stay in it and they even fool themselves into thinking they're staying in it. I think the more options you have, the more you could possibly stray.
Yeah.
Find some other outlets, I guess, too.
Yeah.
Saying to cheat on anybody, obviously, duh. But I think people, why do introverts create deeper relationships? It's insight, it's connection, and then you bring those takeaways to your relationship that make it stronger.
Yeah. Yeah.
Dr. Pohl, but I think a good conversation in this one. I think it's a big topic. I'm sure we could add a lot more in a future one. But yeah, thanks. If you guys have any other topic suggestions, let us know. But we'll see you guys next time.